Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, former NFL scout and now of Sports Info Solutions, joined by Aaron Schatz, the godfather of football analytics and the founder of Football Outsiders. As always, we've got our producer, Justin Stein, and today we have very special guest, Michael Kist. Michael Kist is an expert on all things Eagles. You might know him from Bleeding Green Nation. He's got one of the most popular Eagles podcasts, the most popular Eagles podcast.
I would challenge anybody to dispute the claim that we are the most comprehensive, most downloaded, highest rated Eagles podcast in the world.
Yeah, enough said right there. So we've got an expert in his own right on the podcast front here with us today, and we're going to dive in on all things Eagles. First things first, Michael, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
It's been a long time coming. I'm a long time listener of this podcast. I don't miss an episode, so I was honored when you asked me on here. Of course, I've talked with Aaron before, and me and you, Matt, we've mingled at the Senior Bowl and had really good discussions and a good time. So I'm really excited to do this with two people I really respect in the industry here.
Long time listener, first time caller.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how down in Mobile, in some of the most ridiculous situations, we found our way coming back to football talk at 2 a.m, wherever we found ourselves. So, all right, let's jump right in, and let's start with something that's probably the most interesting thing that's happened with the Eagles all offseason. Aaron, kick us off with the first topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first question, because it's the thing that people have talked about the most with the Eagles this year, is what is your take on the Jalen Hurts pick?
I was pretty upset when it first happened, and I understand some of the reasoning for it, and we'll get into that. But my first feeling about it was this is a team that feels like it can somehow recreate some dumb luck that happened with Nick Foles. Obviously, the backup quarterback position is extremely important, and I agree with Howie that you want to protect the position, protect the organization by making sure that you have that position locked up, taken care of, and that you're developing quarterbacks. I'm a draft a quarterback every year type of guy, even though the hit rate's pretty low. I believe in that. I get it. I understand all that. However, with what was on the board, you put that in there too, with what was on the board, wide receivers, possible potential, we'll talk about this later, but a starting cornerback at outside corner, which they desperately need. I felt like it was a misallocation of resources, and like I'm all about taking an offensive tackle, an edge player, quarterback, wide receivers, those guys you can get discounts on their rookie contracts instead of having to spend in free agency. So I get that aspect of it. But going back to my original gripe with the pick, I mean, Nick Foles, when you look at what happened there, the move to the Eagles was a sensible one. It wasn't like this grand idea of this is a guy that can really get us through a playoff run. This was a veteran quarterback going from a similar scheme to an Andy Reid tree to Doug Peterson. It just made sense to bring in a veteran quarterback that if you need 4 games from him, he can get you to 500. Like, that makes sense to me.
And you're buying low on a guy that had some success for you just recently before that.
Correct. Yeah. All of that makes sense. Now, where you get to the weird aspect of it is I feel like the Eagles, with how much of a resource they spent on this pick, feel like, okay, well, if we get in that situation with again with Carson Wentz, which they couldn't really say, they couldn't really bring up the injuries with him and whatnot, because it would be bad PR for him. But if we get into that situation again, maybe Jalen Hurts can get us through that crazy outlier of a situation that'll probably never happen again. And it made me feel like they overvalued their contribution and how smart they were in bringing Nick Foles and bringing that Super Bowl home. And that's where I kind of got upset about it. Now, in terms of Carson Wentz, I don't feel like the Eagles need to coddle him. I don't feel like bringing in Jalen Hurts is a referendum on Wentz. They paid Wentz. They gave him a lot of freaking money to be their franchise quarterback. So if Carson Wentz is in his feelings about it, I really don't care. I think he should, but I think he should use that to kind of get a chip on his shoulder and come out on fire to the point where, like Brett Favre had said in the past, like, you can bring in all the backups you want. They're never going to see the field. So this maybe Wentz should go all Michael Jordan on this and use this as a fire to light him, to bring him into the 2020 season and just, bust down the doors.
Most NFL quarterbacks have a strong enough ego that they're not going to be hurt by the team drafting a second rounder behind them.
Right. And if anything, it should fuel them. If Wentz is hurt by that, then Wentz is not, the guy that you want, period. And I don't think that Wentz is going to be like that. And people are like, oh, well, we just got over the Nick Foles thing and so on and so forth. I don't necessarily care. You do have to protect the franchise. I just disagree with how much of a resource they spent on it. You look around to the league where guys like Jameis Winston are going for $1 million a pop. I thought the contract with Andy Dalton to the Dallas Cowboys was really smart and affordable, and they had incentives laid in there as well. Like, the backup quarterback that you want is a veteran guy that's going to get you through 4 games and get you to 500. It's not necessarily a second-round pick when you have other needs and you can address those in the draft. So I don't like the pick. I like Jalen Hurts, the player. I don't necessarily think he fits the system. They would have to kind of remodel things if he gets in there. So I'm pretty lukewarm on it. Lukewarm to upset is how I would describe my final take on it to finally answer your question.
It sounds like it's mostly the opportunity cost element that you really don't like about it.
Yeah.
It's not getting a corner. It's not getting somebody that can really help you win more directly when you could have filled in the backup quarterback spot. I'm curious to hear, though, is that the vision for Hurts? Do you believe that the vision is just a backup quarterback for Wentz? Maybe somebody, like if Wentz, the injuries, it's a little bit of insurance there going down like you talked about. Do you believe that that's really the full vision for this player? Or and maybe it is, because I know the Eagles are smart. They're looking at Baltimore. They're seeing quarterbacks that you can win with this sort of a skill set. But at the same time, I also wonder, is there a gadget bonus to Hurts? Because to me, I don't like him in the second round, but when you consider him with the cost-controlled backup quarterback, injury insurance, plus the potential gadget value, like Aaron and I discussed, you don't just draft a gadget. But maybe
the second round.
Maybe the combination of a backup quarterback and a gadget, maybe somehow that does add up to something that. So I'm curious to hear what you think of the usage will be in terms of non-quarterback Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, there's some interesting quotes out there from guys inside the Philadelphia organization. Press Taylor is a guy that they just promoted, the passing game coordinator. He's got a quote out there saying, I really think the future of the NFL is, 2 quarterback systems, 2 quarterbacks on the same time, 2 guys that can throw the ball and whatnot at the same time. I don't know how much stock to put in that and how much he believes that plays out in terms of like how many plays per game. So I wonder about the value of backup plus, like how many plays per game does that really translate to? And then you see like some of the things that Oklahoma tried against LSU, and you see a couple of the gadget plays they tried and they just failed miserably. There was a pass batted down. There was an interception on one of those gadget plays. And you're just like, man, like, I don't know if this is necessarily the route you need to take with it. I don't think that's a great selling point. So I really do think it's just backup, but if the value for gadget to me, it just doesn't move the needle for me. I do think there is value in his ability to run and make smart choices in the running game and be a good runner in that way. If you need to put him in there, it doesn't have to all be on the passing game. You can kind of shift your offense a little bit. You can lean heavy on the RPOs with including the zone read stuff, which is already just kind of caked, built into that. So I like that part of it, but I don't think it has anything to do, hopefully anyway, with the fact that the Eagles are going to become like this 2 quarterback system where they're running gadget plays all the time. I think that's maybe going to translate to 8 or 9 plays a year tops. Now, if they come out this year and all of a sudden they've got, they're running 4 or 5 plays a game where it's Jalen Hurts on the field and they get really tricky with it, it's not just a decoy. That'll be interesting to see how successful that can be. And maybe we're the dumb ones for not seeing that vision. I got to see it first before I really believe it. So I do think it's backup plus the gadget plays, but the gadget part is like a minimal value to me.
It's interesting because, if they are showing that foresight, I love that quote. I hadn't heard that about the potential of 2 quarterbacks. That's something that I'm a believer in. I think we're already seeing it play out with kind of positionless defense coming to football the same way it came to basketball, and how valuable it is when you can have somebody that doesn't have to do one role when they're on the reactive side of things on defense. I wonder if a little bit more positionless offense, having more players that have the ability to throw the football on the field, I wonder if that could be something. But I'm with you. It's hard to bet on it without having seen it.
I've always been a big fan of more halfback option passes, but you don't draft a player just to do halfback option passes.
That's correct. And like, Is he going to be Taysom Hill, where even if you're not getting those gadget plays, is he going to, like, Taysom Hill does like everything. He's a running back, he's an H-back, he's a tight end, he's sealing stuff as a blocker, he's a punt gun, like he's all these different things. Are they planning to do that with Jalen Hurts to try to extract more value out of him that way, where it's not just the gadget stuff, it's the other stuff as well? That remains to be seen. But it's an interesting aspect that we're just going to have to see how it plays out.
It's fascinating. We've seen Taysom do it on the NFL level, and we kind of know what he can do physically. But I would, if you really start to look at things, Jalen Hurts physically, I don't know if there's anything that Taysom Hill does that Jalen Hurts can't do, including, running between the tackles. I don't know if that's how you want to use your backup quarterback, but physically, I think he's a really impressive person, and it'll be really interesting to see how it does play out and how they do use him.
Mentally, too, I think it's really important that Hurts, I think Hurts will do anything you ask him to do and do it with 110%. Like the big sell for Hurts, too, being the backup there and whatnot, is like he's one of the best like character locker room guys that you want to have, and he'll do everything that you ask, which I think is very important.
All right, let's change gears a little bit. I want to talk more on the management side.
Yep.
I want to talk about Doug Peterson and the management of the team. They won the Super Bowl. Everybody thought it was a model franchise, just stockpiles of front office talent, depth at every position on the roster. But now a few prominent members of the front office move on to GM jobs with other teams. The offensive luster of the Super Bowl team has stuck more with Frank Reich than with Foles, Wentz, or Doug Peterson. And with all that said, there's still plenty of positive things that you can point to with the Eagles, and there are a lot of reasons for optimism as you look forward. So I'm curious with you, kind of boots on the ground there, what's your confidence level in the franchise and specifically the management and Doug Peterson?
Yeah, when you look at like the overall construction and you see some of the criticisms of Howie Roseman, like the fan base is kind of weirdly turned on Howie since the Super Bowl. And some people are just like chalking it up to luck, which I think is ridiculous. I was just looking at the NFL power rankings and for GMs from Greg Rosenthal from NFL.com. And when you kind of look through it, he has Howie Roseman as the fourth ranked GM in the league. And I think Eagles fans would argue against that. But if you're going to tell me that a guy that won a Super Bowl and then comes into 2018 has the 31st worst adjusted games lost in the league, makes the playoffs with a backup quarterback at the end of it, and then last year pretty banged up team too, and somehow gets into the playoffs despite like none of the offensive playmakers from the beginning of the season starting at the end of the season or losing guys left and right, you still make the playoffs. You can kind of knock Howie for some of the injury risks that he took in his acquisitions, but I think that people have to take those risks in the NFL league-wide if you want those bargain type deals, those veteran players. The NFL is a rough sport. You also have to give them credit for the fact that the roster was deep enough and they were able to identify talent and kind of replenish themselves that way and get contributions from younger guys like Greg Ward and Boston Scott towards the end of the season. So you have to give them credit there too. And if you really want to make the case that Howie Roseman is not a top 5 GM in the NFL, you got to make the case for some of the other guys. I mean, is it John Robinson, and is he better? Is John Lynch better? Who's really better than Howie Roseman when you really stack them up side by side? We can gripe about Howie Roseman's draft all day long and the past history with that and everything, but at the same time, you have to make a better case for somebody else. I think this is at worst a top 10 GM, at best I think a top 5 GM. And you mentioned the way that the front office is. Their bench is so deep, and I talk with Dan Hatman from the Scouting Academy about this all the time. The way that they've invested in their front office and the talent that they brought in there really shows itself when you see how many teams want to poach their guys. Andrew Berry is gone. Joe Douglas is gone. Andy Weidel is on the fast track to success there. They continually replenish their bench. They invest in analytics. They're always trying to find the small edges. So I do have a lot of confidence in Howie Roseman. You look at the job he did from 2016 to 2017, both those off seasons, I thought it was fantastic. And then when you look at the coaching, I think Doug Peterson might have fell into a little bit of a funk in the middle of the offseason. I think he does have a problem having better ideas, filtered up to him, and they're actively working on that. It's not very often that you land a guy like Frank Reich and are able to have him as your offensive coordinator for 2 years. I mean, that's number one, incredible identification by Doug Peterson and the sell to get him into the building and really helping that offense out. Number two, it is really hard to duplicate that same success. They're trying to bring in new ideas with Rich Gangarello. I like what they're trying to do with the screen game, the play action game that they talked about in the offseason and whatnot. Overall, I think Doug Peterson is a fantastic coach, and I think he's capable of scheming up a fantastic offense. And if you look at 2019 and you want to use that against him, look at the talent that he had to work with and look at the results he was able to get at the end of the season and really turn it around. Look at what he's able to do with a backup quarterback. How many coaches in the NFL, how many NFL coaches can do what Doug did with a backup quarterback 2 years in a row? That late playoff push in 2018 and then the playoff push in 2017. I can't think of many, man. So you're going to have to sell me on coaches that are better if you really want me to dog Doug Peterson.
Well, I would only say, Frank Reich again, right. As far as that goes. But you make an impassioned case that's really in favor of these guys, and I think that speaks volume to me because I know how closely you study this team and study all of that. So, Aaron, I'm curious to hear your reaction.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought it was DeFilippo, and DeFilippo has not had the success since leaving Philadelphia that Philadelphia has had without him. So I think that's one person who moved on to other things, and it's not like he didn't take. I don't think people think now of DeFilippo and think, oh, that's the guy who was responsible for 2017 and the Super Bowl win.
Yeah. They're taking that 2017 and the leap that they saw from Carson Wentz, and they're attributing it to Flip. And I think Flip's best place in the league is quarterback's coach. Now, he's tried his offensive coordinator, hasn't worked out so well, but I think Flip did have good ideas that he pushed up. I don't think he's, offensive coordinator quality, but I think the relationship that him and Carson had where he was really able to get through to Wentz and push Wentz is something that fans are kind of skeptical with Press Taylor, where Press Taylor has more of a buddy-buddy relationship with him. Now, Carson's been banged up, so I really kind of find it hard to fault Press when we're talking about the development, the next leap that Carson can take. Or, maybe we see that this year, and all of a sudden Press is the most popular guy in Philly. So I agree that Flip is maybe overcredited with the leap that Carson took and the impact it had on the offense. I think a lot of it was Frank Reich.
Let me ask you a little bit about the guys that Carson Wentz throws to. So last year, the Eagles threw 39% of passes to tight ends, which turns out to be one of the 5 highest rates of any team since 1985. It just so happens that the highest rate of any team was also last year, which was Baltimore at 42%, but the Eagles were 39%. How much of that is this is what the Eagles want to do? And how much of that is we have so much weakness at wide receiver that we have to overly depend on our tight ends, especially our second tight end?
Yeah, I think you look at the talent that they have with the tight end group, and they're always going to be a team that wants to, as long as they have Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, they're always going to be a team that wants to pass out of 12. And I agree with that assessment. Now, the amount in which they had to do it, especially at the end of last year, I think is abnormal and speaks more to the fact that we don't have outside wide receivers. We're having to use Zach Ertz outside and push Dallas Goedert to the slot and all these different things just to kind of put lipstick on this pig that they had going on with their positional group. Now they add a bunch of wide receivers, and I think you're going to see a team that mixes it up more with their wide receivers, with their tight ends. It's going to be less Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert in the slot. It's going to be more Jalen Reagor on the outside, Deshaun Jackson in the slot. I mean, Deshaun from the slot is something that I think people are sleeping on because they really want to unleash him down the seam. Last year, I think he spent 47.5% of his routes, small sample size, by the way, but about 48% of his routes from the slot. They want to get speed stretching the seams. They want to open up things underneath. So if you don't get the deep ball, you have to respect it. You can then work those tight ends and those underneath routes. The focus in which the Eagles put on the tight ends in the passing game, I think was abnormal. I think they're going to be at a high rate anyway. But it's just a situation last year was so messed up. It's hard to really take any firm takeaways from it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, and that fits in with things with the addition of Reagor and getting Deshaun in that usage a little bit more. I heard a lot of criticism from people saying it almost comical how much the Eagles were just trying to add speed on the outside, but I think it's actually comical how little speed there was that was really playing for them last year. I think it made things really difficult for their quarterback that wants to get the ball down the field. That's where really he's going to be at his best.
His average intended air yards from 2017. I think this is definitely a team that wants to push it down if they have the weapons.
I think it's only comical when the Raiders try to add speed. Everybody else, it's understandable. It's just the Raiders that take it to a comical extent. So,
Yeah, that's the Al Davis Raiders that would take Darius Hayward Bay and all and the fastest quarterback that you could have in the combine. The Raiders were all over him.
Remember the year they took the fastest offensive tackle? Yes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, but like for the Eagles, I think they understood that, your plan can't be to rely on Deshaun Jackson as your speed guy. And last year, the backup plan was Nelson Aguilar, who had plenty of speed. He just couldn't track or catch the ball down the field. So they really invested in adding speed. And then if they have injuries, they have the bench that they can still push the ball down the field. They became a really horizontal offense in the middle of the season. I really think they're trying to avoid that and help Carson get it down the field and, again, loosen things up in the intermediate areas where Carson is so good working to those tight ends.
Yeah, I think they were handcuffed. I don't think that's how they want to play at all. They want to play vertically, especially around Wentz's skill set and what they can do in the RPO game that builds off of that and things like that. So I think there's no doubt. And I just want to circle back a little inside football, but on what you were saying about slot receivers. I think that's something to keep an eye on in the NFL is the deep threat coming out of the slot position, the ability to avoid getting the jam off the line of scrimmage. And you see with all the deep crossing routes, the giant route, whatever you want to call them, that's become so popular, getting, 16 yards down the field to the opposite hash, the deep over, whatever that is. When you have somebody in the slot that can stretch down the field or can also stretch across the field, think Tyreek Hill and what he brings to the Chiefs offense. I think that's a key concept that the Eagles are going to try to really, really make sure they can build on this year once we get to playing football.
Yeah, and you look at like the one touchdown Deshaun had in week 1, it was a dagger concept. And, from on a dagger, you've got the outside dig. And then on the inside of the slot, you've got that clear out 9 route. That's normally just a clear out route. With Deshaun Jackson, that's a touchdown route. And to be able to threaten a safety that way to the point where if he makes the wrong nod, the wrong move in the wrong direction, or you get him on a divide concept where he's got 2 guys screaming at him down the middle of the field and he has to make a choice and he's going to be wrong either way. The Eagles really want to threaten that safety that way, and they could do it with the speed that they have now.
Yep. We all know about the triangle offense in basketball. Newsflash, in passing game, pretty much everything's the triangle offense in football. Yep. And it's that triangle, that bind that you put that safety in right there when you actually might throw the go route that makes the dagger so difficult to defend. All right, Aaron, you want to flip it around to the other side of the ball?
Yeah, let's talk about defense. Obviously, the secondary is going to look very different. First of all, because there were so many injuries last year where no cornerback played more than 600 snaps. Now you've got Darius Slay there. You have Jalen Mills moving to safety. And I want to point out an interesting stat that I put together when we were putting together the strategic tendencies comments for Football Outsiders Almanac, which is that Philadelphia's defense had the league's biggest gap last year between man and zone coverage, which is sort of interesting. With man, you don't think of them as like a strong man coverage team because you don't think of these cornerbacks as strong cornerbacks, especially given how much they had to dip into the bottom of the roster last year. Yeah. But with man coverage last year, they allowed 5.9 yards a pass with minus 1.8% DVOA. With zone coverage, it was 8.1 yards per pass with 48.9% DVOA. Yeah. So I'm just curious to get your general take on what's going to happen to the secondary this year. Who's going to start next to Slay? Obviously, Nickel Roby Coleman now they have as a really good nickel back, but what happens with Mills moving to safety and what do things look like?
You sent me that stat. I was fascinated by it because you're right. We don't think of the Eagles as a man coverage team because the cornerback play last year was so poor. I think it really speaks to the fact that there's so many different people.
It's interesting because it wasn't as poor as you think. When you look at the SIS charting stats, some of these guys, they're just not the guys who started the season as the starter. But Avonte Maddox, Rasul Douglas, and Sidney Jones had reasonable numbers. It's Darby, who's now gone, and Jalen Mills, who's switching positions. Those were the guys who had bad numbers.
Which is fascinating to me. And you look at quarterback rating when targeted, and it's the same story with Rasul and Sidney and everything like that. I really think it speaks to the fact that the Eagles couldn't get set up at the outside quarterback position, guys coming in and out. And they did a lot of Jim Schwartz, when he runs his own defenses, there's a lot of country cover 3 in there, and he wants to rally and tackle. And guys had big time problems getting connected to routes and being on the same page. There was a lot of mental bust in that defense. And only that, I know at least in the first half of the season, when they were playing zone against play action, they were just getting absolutely torched. Jim Schwartz likes to load the box. Those linebackers are fast to flow and they are fast to get out of position, and you can throw it right behind him, and the safeties weren't able to make up for that deficiency. And plus you had the guys that couldn't play the ball in the air with Darby and Mills on the outside. So when you look forward projecting to 2020 and you think about the quarterback 2 position, I was shocked, and this is one of the reasons I didn't like the Jalen Hurts pick. You've got Christian Fulton from LSU sitting out there that I think could be a year 1 starter. Otherwise, you're rocking with Avonte Maddox, and people, I think, gas up Maddox a little bit and his potential on the outside. The guy's got the T-Rex arms, 29-inch arms. You can't really press. He had some really good games in 2018 when he was forced to start on the outside, and right now he's the favorite. But when you watch those games, you understand that he was getting a lot of help in the way of, rolled coverage his way, where he could kind of leverage the underneath zone and use his quickness and not really have to jam and stay connected. And he was good at that, but I don't always want to have to dump resources into protecting a corner. I think that cornerback 2 position becomes less important with Darius Slay because Darius Slay can travel with wide receiver 1. But at some point, you're going to have to cover on the outside. At some point, you're going to play Dallas, and you're going to have to cover Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb. So you're going to have issues there. Rasul Douglas is probably the most hopeful guy. He's got technical issues, but he's the only guy in the quarterback group that can play the ball in the air and has good ball skills and give you picks. So he's going to leak some yardage. He's going to get over aggressive and get beaten, but he can at least play the ball. And last year, he was the only guy at cornerback that was making plays on the ball. So I think Rasul, as much as Jim Schwartz tends to not play him for whatever reason, despite what they got going on at outside corner, is my favorite. If they start Avonte, it's going to be interesting to see the resources they're going to have to dump in protecting him. And then at that safety position, if you're asking anybody to replace Malcolm Jenkins and do the quote-unquote Malcolm Jenkins role, I think you're absolutely out of your freaking mind, especially if you're using a quarterback converted to safety with Jalen Mills, who's a smart player. But when you look at where Jenkins lined up, he's at 22 different alignments. There are games he's at 17 different alignments. And not only does he have to know his job on any given play, he has to know everybody else's job on any given play. So I think you may see some more vanilla defenses from them to try to protect those safeties a little bit more. With Slay, you hope that taking away wide receiver 1 pretty consistently helps the overall product and helps them put resources.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not really super encouraged by what you're saying there in terms of maybe being forced to rely on more of that vanilla stuff, what you called earlier country cover 3.
Yeah.
For the listeners at home, that's the first zone coverage that most DBs ever learn is your basic cover 3. But in the NFL these days, that's a bit of a dinosaur. That's not even a concept that's really getting by a lot of high school passing games at this point in 2020. So to think that they would have to keep that vanilla when that's where they really struggled. It wasn't so much that they were good in man last year. By the way, I think Malcolm Jenkins has something to do with that. But I think it was really that they were so bad in zone. So if they do have to rely on those concepts as opposed to being able to do a cover 3 Mabel, relying on Slay out there, to be on the island, or being able to do some things that'll fit what Maddox can do. Because like you mentioned, you can't put him up there in press and expect him to be able to get that done. So fitting him in the roles, I hope that they can find a little bit more of a continuity, because that was a really just disgusting.
Yeah, you go up against the Saints and you play country cover 3, you're getting torched up all game. It's not a question. So they're going to have to find a way to be able to run some more complex coverages, maybe do some more split field stuff where they can roll coverage away from Slay and let him kind of do his thing. I've also never seen, it may have been a while, I don't remember the Buffalo or Tennessee days necessarily, but I don't know if, Slay is going to travel with wide receiver 1 every week. So I'm interested to see how Schwartz deploys it that way.
Yeah, I don't think he's generally been a number 1 corner travel with a guy. I think he's been more of a zone guy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see how that plays out too, and how teams, try the count and mouse game. How can we get away from Slay? How can we get, our wide receiver 1 away from Slay, and how then Schwartz, counters that as well.
Right. It's like with Dallas, that's less of an issue because they're 3 wide receivers strong. But when you play Washington, you've got to shut down McLaurin.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So are you going to have him travel with them, or are you going to always have to give safety help? What if they motion him? How do you respond to that to make sure that you can contain that threat? And Schwartz is weird for me because week by week, like he'll get in stretches where 4 to 5 weeks go by and he's doing the same thing and he's getting torched. And all of a sudden he comes out with like a brilliant game plan that really kind of changes things. Like that Los Angeles game back in 2018, I thought was like his masterpiece, but like it's so infrequent with him. So much has to happen leading up to that for him to change who he is. And usually you get a good product out of that, but it takes forever. That's frustrating.
Can you explain that, Mike? Can you explain what was a masterpiece about that game? What went into that you're describing there?
Yeah, I mean, with Schwartz, he wants to be a single high defense. He wants to have a lot of guys in the box and whatnot. And with the Rams game, teams started to figure out that you could use more split field coverages, more quarters coverages, and he played even more off coverage further back than he usually did because he understood that the Rams, in breaking, out breaking routes were all around 10 to 12 yards. So you want to sit on those and not have to worry about turning it 5 yards and running with them. So he was playing off and just sitting on all the breakers. And it really limited, what Jared Goff was seeing from his picture was very cloudy in that game. And he was able to confuse Goff, and the 4-man rush was able to get there. So Schwartz was able to finally, get out of his mindset of single high. I'm playing 5 yards off. We're going to play a little bit further off. We're going to use split field coverage. We're going to sit on these in-breaking, out-breaking routes. We're going to, dump resources into stopping that, and really help them that game.
Right, a little going towards the kind of the zone match concepts a little bit more and away from what his bread and butter is. That's interesting. Okay, on that related note, I wanted to ask about their blitz tendencies under Jim Schwartz. So they've been kind of an interesting team. They're top 5 in terms of 4-man rush usage each of the last 3 years. And then with the struggles in the secondary last year, they were still 30th in the NFL in terms of the frequency with which they brought 5 rushers, but they were 4th in the NFL in the amount of time they brought 6 or more. So what do you think of that interesting split where they were either basically bringing the house or not bringing anybody? And then with a hopefully improved secondary this year, what do you expect from Jim Schwartz in 2020?
And I'll add that Schwartz has been like that for a while, like that he's high in the amount of bringing 6 or more, but low in the amount of bringing 5.
Yeah, he doesn't necessarily want to blitz a whole lot. And I think it went up last year because he didn't have a whole lot of faith in the secondary, and he was trying to force teams to be conservative. Like, we have to get the ball out quick because there's 6 guys coming, rally up and tackle. Problem is they were one of the worst tackling teams in the league last year, so that didn't necessarily work out. And they got gashed on some key downs, some key situations. 3rd down inside the 50, he really wanted to bring the heat, and it hurt him a lot of different times. When you have the improved pass rush, when you bring in Javon Hargrave, if Derek Barnett takes a step up, I think he has more faith in the 4-man rush to get there. And last year it really did hurt them when you're bringing 6 guys and guys can't cover and guys can't tackle behind them. It was very frustrating, and he amped it up in such a way that it was really incredible to see, because we don't think of Schwartz as a blitzing guy. He wants to get there with 4. He lost confidence with that. And then he lost confidence in his cornerbacks, and his cornerbacks didn't reward him by being able to cover, on 3rd and 13, where Darius Slayton's taking one, 40 plus yards to the house. It was such a weird year to see him so aggressive early on in the year, bringing the house in the manner that he did. Because, like I said, with him, it seems like he doesn't want to bring 5 and see how it plays out and hopefully get a man free. He's bringing 6, trying to force you to be conservative. And this is something, Matt, that we talked about before. The cover 0 blitz, I think, is less risky than we imagine it. You're bringing a lot of guys, yes, but you're also kind of forcing the quarterback's hand. If you've got Eli Manning back there and he sees 6 coming, that ball is coming out super, super quick. So if you can make that tackle, you're fine. But what I expect in 2020 is less of that, more relying on the 4-man rush. I mean, they were playing Anthony Rush at defensive tackle. They were missing Malik Jackson. They get him back this year. They add Javon Hargrave. If Schwartz has faith that he can get there with 4, he's going to be yet again in the top 3 for 4-man rush frequency. Plus, you have Slay. You have more confidence that you can cover with 4-man rushes. And I think that's what I think you see him go back to that conservative style when it comes to bringing pressure.
He wants to win with that personnel up front, but if he can't, and he knows he can't, then he'll revert to bringing the numbers. And as you pointed out, John Shirley did some really excellent research that showed that bringing 6 really isn't as risky as we all think of it as. The cover 0 blitz isn't really as risky as we think of it as. But at the same time, I see the pain in your face as you discuss all those breakdowns in those situations, and the numbers back it up. They really struggled when they did bring 6 or more last year because of those breakdowns. But at the same time, I'm not sure if you looked more in pain when you were describing that, or when you were just describing country cover 3. I don't know which one seemed to affect you more.
What was really painful for me is when you bring the cover 0 blitz and you end up with Marcus Epps on DK Metcalf to close out the playoff game.
Well, let me just ask quickly about off-ball linebackers. How bad is it? Because that was already an underwhelming unit, and then they let Nigel Bradham and Camus Gregier-Hill walk in free agents. It's not like people are signing their off-ball linebackers, right? Nigel Bradham is still sitting out there. Zach Brown is still sitting out there. But they're down to like Nate Gary, who had a really high broken tackle rate last year, and like Duke Riley, who the Falcons cast off. How bad is it? And in your mind, how much of a difference does it make, given that analytics suggests that this is the least important position on the defense?
Yeah, the Eagles are analytically minded, and they're very analytically in line when it comes to linebackers as far as that goes. They really don't value the position all that much. At the same time, yeah, it's concerning. Nate Gary is one of the worst tacklers in the league. I mean, he's a blind dog in a meat house when it comes to play action and getting to where he needs to be in, connected and everything like that. And TJ Edwards was, nice against the run last year, but we don't know if the guy can cover. And Camus was one of their better cover guys, and a young guy I thought that they could develop into something. So to answer your question, I have no idea. It looks bad. How much that impacts the Eagle, hopefully it's not all that much, and the defensive line can protect them in the run game, and hopefully they can survive in the pass game without being too much of a liability. I don't have a whole lot of faith in that from the linebackers coming into this year.
Yeah, the Eagles are high last year in how often they played dime, but even if you're playing dime, one of these guys has to be on the field. And half the time you're playing nickel, which means 2 of these guys have to be on the field. And then when you're playing base 20% of the time, that's when 3 of these guys have to be on the field. So you got to find some guys.
Yeah, and Jordan Hicks was their guy for a while, and he was a pretty good coverage linebacker. 2017, Nigel Bradham was one of the best coverage linebackers in the league, and kind of took a step back and was banged up. They have to find answers. I don't think it's like a guy with like Davion Taylor, who played like 1 game of high school football and played that star position, in college. It's going to be a long developmental arc for him. So I'm really interested to see where they find the answer.
All right. On that note, we've got to sign off. Kist, is there anything that you want to plug before we get out of here?
Put in Bleeding Green Nation into any podcast app. We got a ton of variety of shows, Eagles related, NFL related, all the draft stuff that we did. Check that out. Thank you to all of our listeners. You're the reason that we're able to do this every week. So please continue to subscribe, rate, review, and check out SIS Film Breakdowns on YouTube, led by 2 of our top scouts on the Football Rookie Handbook, Nathan Cooper and John Todd. There was a great pre-draft video done on Jalen Reagor. It's been really popular, so check that one out on the SIS Film Breakdowns YouTube. The Jalen Reagor stuff, really interesting, especially if you're an Eagles fan looking to see how he's likely to fit into the offense. Sports Info Solutions is also recruiting 2020 football video scouts. If you're interested in applying, head to the careers section of our website, sportsinfosolutions.com. As we gear up for sports getting started again, we are resuming all of our usual operations at SIS, and we are looking for football video scouts. As a reminder, the Football Outsiders Almanac will be out in July. We are about T-minus a month, and Aaron's working hard on that. So for my co-host, Aaron Schatz, our producer, Justin Stein, and our guest, Michael Kist, I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for joining us for the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast.